The judge is about to sentence a black teen, suddenly. He says just 2 words that make her stop. Welcome back to Meaningful Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and start the story right now. The courtroom buzzed with a restless, electric hum as the heavy wooden doors slammed shut, sealing the fate of the day's proceedings. Shadows danced across the polished floor, cast by the flickering overhead lights that seemed to groan under the weight of too many trials. At the defendant's table sat Markeith Jameson, a 17-year-old black teenager. His silhouette carved from stone, unmoving, unreadable, a statue of defiance wrapped in a faded hoodie. The air crackled with tension, thick as storm clouds rolling in, as all eyes darted toward him, then away, as if afraid to linger too long. Judge Evelyn Marston perched on her bench like a hawk, her gavel glinting like a blade under the dim glow. She'd seen it all, thousands of cases. A parade of tragedy and rage that marched through her courtroom like ghosts. Today felt no different at first. Just another name on a docket. Another file to skim. Trespassing. Theft. Routine. Her fingers flicked through the papers, barely grazing the ink. Markeith caught inside an abandoned warehouse, allegedly stripping copper wire. Nabbed by an officer who swore the kid didn't belong. She didn't even look up. Not yet. Then Gerald Linton, the prosecutor, strode forward, a wiry figure with a face sharp as shattered glass and a voice that scraped the room raw. He slammed his fist on the podium, the sound ricocheting like gunfire. "This isn't some petty slip-up, Your Honor," he snarled, his words slicing through the silence. "It's about accountability. Let this slide." And what's next? Every punk with sticky fingers breaking into private property, looting whatever they please? We're sending a message here. His eyes blazed, daring anyone to challenge him. Across the room, Rachel Moreau, the public defender, let out a sharp, mocking sigh that cut through Linton's tirade like a whip. She flipped open her file with a flourish, her voice dripping with disdain. "Abandoned warehouse, Your Honor. No owner. No damage. No stolen goods found. Where's the crime?" She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto Linton like a predator sizing up prey. "This is a ghost hunt. And my client's the scapegoat." The room held its breath. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her patience fraying like a worn rope. She'd seen this dance before, kids like Markeith, young and black, snared in the system's jaws before they could even blink. Trouble or just trapped, guilty or not, they all blurred together after a while. She lifted her eyes from the file, finally landing on him. She expected the usual, fear twitching in his hands, anger smoldering in his glare, or the slump of exhaustion. But Markeith? He was a void. No flinch, no scowl, just stillness, his dark eyes steady as a frozen lake. Watching her back, it unnerved her. "Mr. Jameson," she said, her voice a low rumble, cutting through the charged air. "You understand the charges against you?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, calm as a whisper in a storm. No hesitation, no tremor. The simplicity of it jolted her. "And you were in the warehouse?" she pressed, leaning forward, her shadow stretching across the bench. "Yes, ma'am." Again, that steady tone, like he was reciting a fact no one could dispute. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. Where was the excuse? The stammered defense? She'd braced for a fight. But this kid handed her nothing to grip onto. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as a murmur slithered through the gallery, a ripple of unease. Sharp and alive, something was off. She could feel it coiling in the pit of her stomach, a spark igniting in the dark. The courtroom pulsed like a living thing, its silence fractured only by the faint creak of wooden benches and the shallow breaths of onlookers hanging on the edge of their seats. Judge Evelyn Marston's gaze bore into Markeith Jameson, her fingers tightening around the gavel as if it could anchor her to the unraveling moment. The air felt charged, heavy with the scent of polished oak and unspoken questions, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, waiting for the boy to crack. She'd asked him why he'd been in that forsaken warehouse, and now the room teetered on the brink of his answer. Markeith shifted, just a tilt of his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers like twin embers glowing in the dim light. For the first time, a flicker of something alive, danced across his face, cutting through his eerie calm. "I was doing my job," he said, his voice low and steady, a blade slipping through the tension. The words detonated silently, rippling outward like a shockwave. Evelyn's breath hitched, her spine stiffening as if she'd been struck. His job? The phrase clawed at her mind. Sharp and jagged, refusing to settle. Beside him, Rachel Moreau froze, her pen hovering midair, a deer caught in headlights. Gerald Linton, the prosecutor, let out a scoff that sliced the air like a whip, his lips curling into a sneer. Your job? He spat, venom dripping from every syllable. What's that supposed to mean? Trespassing's a career now. Stealing copper wire pays the bills? Markeith didn't flinch, didn't blink. No, he said, his tone smooth as polished stone. I mean my real job. The calm in his voice was a taunt, a dare, and it set the room ablaze with whispers, soft at first, then rising like a swarm of locusts buzzing in the shadows. Eyes darted, jurors shifted, and a chill snaked up Evelyn's spine, prickling the back of her neck. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't a kid scrambling for an excuse. This was something else, something bigger, lurking just beneath the surface. She leaned forward, the bench creaking under her weight, her voice a low growl cutting through the chaos. Your real job, Mr. Jameson? Her words hung there, heavy as thunderheads, demanding he fill the void. What exactly is that? Markeith held her stare, unyielding, and then, slowly, deliberately, a smile crept across his lips. It wasn't smug, wasn't triumphant, but sharp and knowing, like he'd been holding a secret too long and was finally ready to let it bleed. Maybe you should ask the officer who arrested me, he said, each word deliberate. A match struck in the dark. The room erupted, not in sound, but in a suffocating, electric stillness. Linton's face twisted, his sharp features contorting as if he'd been slapped. Moreau's mouth parted, a gasp trapped in her throat. Evelyn's grip on the gavel tightened until her knuckles widened, the wood biting into her palm. The officer? What did he know? What was this kid playing at? Her pulse thundered in her ears, a war drum signaling something colossal looming on the horizon. The whispers grew louder, a tide of confusion crashing against the walls. But before she could demand more, before she could pry the truth from him, the courtroom doors exploded open with a groan that shattered the moment like glass. The courtroom trembled on a razor's edge, the air thick with the acrid tang of anticipation, every breath a spark waiting to ignite. Judge Evelyn Marston's eyes burned into Markeith Jameson. His cryptic words, "Ask the officer who arrested me," still echoing in her skull like a gunshot ricochet. The room hung suspended, a taut wire ready to snap, when the heavy wooden doors at the back exploded open with a bone-rattling groan. The sound cleaved the silence like a guillotine, and all heads whipped around, gasps slicing through the haze as a figure stormed in, a man in a dark suit, his badge flashing like a beacon under the flickering lights. Detective Raymond Cole strode forward, boots striking the floor with the relentless thud of a war drum. His face was a mask of steel, carved from years of battles unseen, and his presence sucked the oxygen from the room. Jurors flinched, papers rustled, and Evelyn's jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Cole didn't waver, didn't blink, his gaze sweeping the chaos before locking onto Markeith, a fleeting, electric exchange that crackled with unspoken weight. Detective Cole, Evelyn's voice lashed out, sharp as a whip crack. You better have a damn good reason for storming my courtroom like this. Her gavel hovered, a poised falcon ready to strike. Cole halted, unflinching, his voice a low rumble that rolled through the room like distant thunder. Your Honor, there's something you need to know before this goes any further. His words landed like a grenade, primed and ticking. Gerald Linton shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor, his face flushed with fury. This is outrageous, he barked, voice grating like sandpaper on stone. The trial's in motion. This is a circus stunt. But Cole didn't even glance his way, his focus riveted on Evelyn, a wall of resolve against the prosecutor's storm. There's been a misunderstanding, Cole said, his tone measured but edged with steel. About Mr. Jameson's identity. He let the words hang, a dark cloud swelling over the room. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her pulse hammering in her throat. A misunderstanding? She repeated, each syllable a dagger probing for truth. Markeith exhaled softly through his nose, hands still folded, his calm a stark, eerie contrast to the chaos erupting around him, like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Cole's hesitation was brief, a shadow crossing his face before he dropped the bombshell. Markeith Jameson isn't a suspect. His voice deepened, deliberate, as he scanned the room. Then delivered the blow. "He's one of us." The air vanished. A vacuum swallowed the courtroom, leaving only the thud of Evelyn's heartbeat and the stunned silence of 100 held breaths. Then, a rupture. Gasps erupted like gunfire. A woman in the gallery clapped a hand over her mouth, and jurors jolted as if electrified. Rachel Moreau blinked. Wait, what? A strangled whisper lost in the rising tide of disbelief. Linton's sneer faltered, his sharp face twisting into something feral. Evelyn leaned forward, gripping the bench's edge until the wood groaned. "Detective Cole," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "You'd better clarify that, right now." Cole flicked his eyes to Markeith, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal. A key turning in a lock. "He's an undercover officer," Cole said, his words a sledgehammer smashing through the room's fragile order. "Part of an internal investigation into racial profiling and corruption in law enforcement." His arrest? It wasn't supposed to happen. The gallery erupted, a wildfire of murmurs and cries igniting the shadows. Evelyn's pulse roared, her mind racing as the pieces slammed together. Markeith. This quiet, unshakable boy. A cop? She stared at him, and for the first time, his stillness wasn't just strange, it was a weapon. Honed and deadly, aimed straight at the heart of the system she'd sworn to uphold. The courtroom was a powder keg, the air crackling with the aftershock of Detective Cole's revelation. Markeith Jameson. An undercover officer, a ghost in their system. The gallery buzzed like a hive of hornets, whispers spiraling into a roar, while shadows twisted under the flickering lights, as if the room itself recoiled from the truth. Judge Evelyn Marston's hands gripped the bench, nails digging into the wood, her pulse a relentless drumbeat as she stared at the boy who'd just turned her world upside down. Markeith sat there, unshaken, his dark eyes glinting like polished obsidian, a quiet storm brewing beneath his stillness. Gerald Linton exploded, his hands slamming the prosecution table with a crack that split the air like thunder. "Outrageous," he roared, his face a mask of scarlet fury, veins bulging at his temples. "A 17-year-old cop? You expect us to swallow this fairy tale?" His voice was a jagged blade, slashing through the chaos, daring anyone to defy him. "This is a sham. A kid with a badge playing games with the law." Rachel Moreau shot up, her chair screeching like a wounded animal, her eyes blazing with righteous fire. "Enough," she snapped, her voice a whip lashing back at Linton. "No evidence of theft, an abandoned building, no owner, and you still dragged him here, ready to bury him without a second thought." She thrust a finger toward Markeith, her words trembling with fury. "You didn't question a damn thing, did you?" Linton whirled on her, his sneer venomous. "He was trespassing." Moreau, caught red-handed. Probable cause doesn't bend for sob stories. His gaze darted to Markeith, narrowing to slits. "What's this job of yours? Huh? Skulking around warehouses like a thief, then crying undercover when you're nabbed?" Markeith leaned forward, slow and deliberate, his hands resting on the table like a predator poised to strike. "I wasn't skulking," he said, his voice a low, steady current cutting through the storm. "I was watching, listening, documenting." His eyes locked onto Linton's, unflinching, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as his words sank deep. "I was there to see how the system chews up kids like me, how it decides guilt before the gavel even falls." The silence that followed was suffocating, a void swallowing every breath. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, a cold sweat prickling her skin. Linton let out a dry, bitter laugh, but it cracked at the edges. "Hollow. Documenting?" he sneered, stepping closer, his shadow looming over Markeith. "What truth are you chasing, kid? That you got caught and now you're spinning this tale to dodge the consequences?" Markeith tilted his head, just a fraction, his gaze piercing through Linton like a blade through smoke. "The truth," he said, his voice soft but heavy as iron. "That in a room like this, a kid like me is guilty the second he walks in." The words landed like a boulder in still water, ripples of shock radiating outward. The gallery gasped, a juror clutched her chest, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling as the weight of his accusation crashed against her. "Did he?" Markeith added, his question a quiet, lethal strike aimed at Linton. "Did he have probable cause?" The simplicity of it, the audacity, hung there, a guillotine blade swaying above them all. Linton faltered, his bravado flickering like a dying flame. But he rallied, jabbing a finger at Markeith. "You were there, breaking the law, that's all that matters." His voice rose, frantic, a man grasping at crumbling ground. Evelyn's fingers twitched around the gavel, her mind a battlefield of doubt and revelation. She cut through the fray, her voice a sharp, commanding boom. "Detective Cole." What exactly was he investigating? Her eyes flicked to Cole, standing like a sentinel in the chaos, his face unreadable. Cole stepped forward, his boots thudding against the floor like a countdown. "Racial profiling, Your Honor," he said, his tone grave, resonant. "Corruption, disparities in how young black men are treated, arrested, charged, convicted." Markeith was our eyes in the dark. The room erupted again, a tidal wave of murmurs crashing against the walls. Linton's face drained of color, his argument unraveling, while Moreau's eyes widened, a spark of triumph igniting. Evelyn sat back, her heart pounding, the case file before her now a live wire, dangerous, untamed. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning, and Markeith's quiet defiance had lit the fuse. The courtroom was a cauldron of chaos, the air thick with the bitter tang of disbelief and the low rumble of a storm about to break. Judge Evelyn Marston sat perched on her bench, her gavel a cold, gleaming talisman in her grip, its weight anchoring her as the revelations of Markeith Jameson, an undercover officer, ignited the room. The gallery buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps, their murmurs rising into a frenzied hum, while shadows flickered across the walls, as if the truth itself cast a jagged, restless dance. Rachel Moreau seized the moment, her voice slicing through the din like a blade through silk. "Your Honor," she cried, slamming her hands on the defense table, the sound a gunshot in the charged silence. "In light of this bombshell, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Jameson." Her eyes blazed with defiance, daring the system to defy her now. Gerald Linton scoffed, a sharp, brittle sound that cracked like ice underfoot. But it was drowned by the weight of the moment. Evelyn barely heard him, her gaze locked on Markeith. He sat there, a statue carved from shadow and resolve, his face an unreadable mask, not a flicker of triumph, not a trace of anger, just a stillness that seemed to mock the chaos swirling around him. Her pulse thundered, a relentless drumbeat echoing in her skull, as she wrestled with the enormity of what she'd nearly done, condemned an innocent man. A cop. Without a second thought, she lifted the gavel, its heft trembling in her hand, and brought it down with a resounding crack that reverberated through the room like a thunderclap. "Motion granted," she declared, her voice a low, iron-clad decree that silenced the storm. The words hung heavy, a guillotine falling, severing the case in two. A hush descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by scattered gasps and the rustle of shifting bodies, some relieved, some enraged, all reeling. Markeith rose, slow and deliberate, his faded hoodie shifting like a shroud as he straightened. No smirk, no bow, just a single, quiet nod, more to himself than the room, as if he'd always known this end was coming. The gallery watched, breath held, as he turned to leave, his steps a steady rhythm against the polished floor. But Evelyn's voice cut through the stillness like a whip, halting him mid-stride. "Officer Jameson." He stopped, turning back, his dark eyes meeting hers with a piercing clarity that made her chest tighten. She leaned forward, the bench creaking under her weight, her voice softer now, laced with something raw. "You believe the system can change?" Markeith's answer came swift and sure, a blade slipping through the quiet. "I believe people can." His tone was steady, but beneath it lurked a weariness, a shadow of battles fought in silence. The words struck her like a blow, burrowing deep, and for a moment, the courtroom faded, the jurors, the files, the flickering lights, leaving only the two of them, locked in a silent reckoning. Evelyn swallowed, her throat dry as ash, and glanced at the case file still splayed before her, its pages a silent accusation of her earlier indifference. She nodded once, a gesture heavy with unspoken promise, and Markeith turned again, pushing through the doors with a finality that echoed in the hollow space he left behind. The room exhaled, a collective release of tension. But Evelyn remained still, her fingers tracing the file's edge. The gavel lay quiet now. But the weight of this moment, this boy, this truth, clung to her like a second skin. A scar she'd carry long after the lights dimmed and the courtroom emptied. The courtroom drained like a battlefield after the clash, its echoes fading into a hollow silence as the last jurors shuffled out, their murmurs trailing like smoke. The heavy doors thudded shut, sealing Judge Evelyn Marston inside with the ghosts of the day's war. She slumped back in her chair, the bench creaking beneath her, the gavel cold and lifeless in her hand, a relic of a justice she'd nearly wielded blind. The air hung thick, laced with the faint scent of sweat and ink, while shadows stretched long and jagged across the walls, as if the room itself mourned the unraveling of its order. Markeith Jameson lingered near the defendant's table, a solitary figure in the dim light, his faded hoodie a shroud against the sterile glow. The others had fled, Linton with his clenched jaw, Moreau with her parting nod, Cole with his cryptic farewell, but Markeith stayed, his presence a quiet thunder rumbling beneath the stillness. Evelyn's eyes flicked to him, her chest tight with a storm she couldn't name. Relief should have come with the case's end, but instead, a clawing unease sank into her bones. She'd almost sentenced him, an officer, a kid, based on nothing but the shadow he cast. Judge Marston, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through fog. She jolted, meeting his gaze, dark, steady, piercing, as he stepped closer, hands buried in his pockets. You're thinking about it, aren't you? All the times you might have gotten it wrong. Her breath caught, a shard of ice lodging in her throat. His words weren't sharp, weren't cruel, just a mirror held up to her soul, reflecting truths she'd buried under years of robes and rulings. That's a bold assumption, she snapped, her voice tighter than she meant, her fingers curling into the bench's edge. Markeith shrugged, a slow roll of his shoulders, his eyes never wavering. Is it? The question was a spark, igniting the air between them. And Evelyn felt it, a tremor deep in her core, a crack in the armor she'd worn too long. He was right. She'd seen cases like his before, young black boys, faces blurring into a parade of guilt she'd stamped without question. How many had been innocent? How many had she failed? Her grip tightened, knuckles whitening as she forced the words out. What were you hoping to accomplish with this operation? Her voice trembled, a thread of desperation weaving through it. Markeith exhaled, a soft sound that carried the weight of years. I wanted to know if I'd get a fair shot, if any of us would. His gaze swept the empty room, lingering on the vacant jury box, the silent podium. I needed to see if it was me they judged, or just what they saw when I walked in. The words hit her like a wave, cold and unrelenting, dragging her under. She thought of the file she'd barely skimmed, the assumptions she'd made, how close she'd come to crushing him beneath the same blind hammer. Her throat burned, a knot of shame and fury she couldn't swallow. And the documentation you gathered? She pressed, her voice rising, urgent. What happens to it now? Markeith turned fully, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. Some gets filed, some gets analyzed. He paused, a shadow crossing his face, then added, most gets ignored. The truth in his tone was a blade, cold and final, slicing through her illusions. Her stomach twisted, the file on her bench suddenly a live grenade, its pages ticking with untold stories. So nothing changes? She asked, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Raw and pleading, Markeith's eyes held hers, unyielding, and he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a gunshot. Not unless someone in the right place makes a change. The challenge landed at her feet, heavy as stone, and she felt it, the weight of his trust, his hope, his quiet, unshakable dare. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence a taut wire stretching between them. Then, without a word, Markeith turned, his footsteps a steady drumbeat toward the doors. Wait! Evelyn's cry broke free, sharp and desperate, halting him just before he vanished. He glanced back, one hand on the frame. Waiting. Her heart pounded, a wild thing caged in her ribs. If I don't ignore it, she said, her voice trembling with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. What then? Markeith studied her, his gaze a searchlight piercing the dark. Then maybe next time, he said, slow and deliberate, someone like me won't need a badge to prove they deserve to be heard. The words hung there, a spark in the void. And with a final look, a flicker of something like faith, he pushed through the doors and was gone. Evelyn sat alone, the silence roaring in her ears. Markeith's challenge, a fire now burning in her chest, one she wouldn't extinguish. The courtroom lay silent as a tomb. Its once roaring chaos now a faint echo swallowed by the shadows. Judge Evelyn Marston sat alone at her bench, the air heavy with the musk of old wood and the ghosts of the days unraveling. The gavel rested before her, a cold, impotent relic, its gleam dulled under the flickering lights that buzzed like dying flies. Her fingers trembled as she opened the case file again, its pages crackling like dry bones, revealing a ledger of injustice she'd never dared to face: arrests, reports, names of the unseen, each one a life crushed beneath the system's unyielding wheel. The weight of it pressed against her chest, a stone sinking into dark waters. She closed her eyes, and the past roared back, a kaleidoscope of faces, young and black, blurring into one another across years of rulings. A 16-year-old boy, accused of assault, his fate sealed by blurry footage and her swift gavel. She'd never questioned it, never lingered, just moved on. Now, those memories clawed at her, sharp and relentless, whispering, How many were like Markeith? Her breath hitched, a jagged edge of guilt slicing through her calm. A heavy knock shattered the stillness, the sound a hammer against her skull. Her eyes snapped open as Detective Raymond Cole stepped through the doorway, his silhouette a dark specter against the dim hall. His badge glinted like a warning, his face carved from granite, unreadable yet piercing. "You okay, Judge?" he asked, his voice a low growl that rumbled through the emptiness. Evelyn let out a dry, brittle laugh, the sound scraping her throat. "Do I look okay?" She gestured to the file, its pages splayed like an open wound. Cole's gaze followed, lingering, and he crossed the room with the steady tread of a man who'd seen too much. He sank into the gallery's first row, elbows on his knees, his presence a quiet storm filling the space. "You read it," he said, not a question but a fact, his eyes flicking back to her. She nodded, her fingers tracing the edges of the file as if it might burn her. He sighed, a sound heavy with years of buried truths. "We've been pushing this investigation for a while. But you know how it goes. People see what they want to see." Her voice came low, edged with steel. "And what do they want to see?" Cole leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the floor like a noose. "Criminals. Case numbers. Convictions. Not the mistakes, not the cracks in the machine." His words were a blade, cold and precise, cutting through the illusions she'd clung to. Evelyn's fingers drummed against the desk, a restless tattoo of doubt. "And what do you see?" she demanded, her gaze locking onto his. He met her stare, unflinching, a system spinning the same damn wheel, over and over, and the people caught in it, they don't even know there's a way out. His voice dropped, a rumble of thunder on the horizon, and the truth settled between them like ash after a fire. Her chest tightened, Markeith's words echoing in her mind, "Then maybe next time. Someone like me won't need a badge to be heard." She straightened, the file a live wire in her hands. "What if I took this public?" she asked, the question bursting free, raw and reckless. Cole's eyebrow arched, a spark of surprise igniting in his steady gaze. "You serious?" He leaned back, studying her as if she'd just stepped into a ring she couldn't leave. "I don't know," she admitted, then shook her head, her voice hardening. "No, that's a lie. I do know. I just never thought about it until today." Her heart pounded, a wild drumbeat, as the weight of her own power crashed over her. A judge, a voice, a chance to break the wheel. Cole smirked, a rare crack in his armor. If a sitting judge started kicking up dust about cases like these, people would notice, some would listen, some would fight you tooth and nail. But it wouldn't stay buried. His words were a dare, a match held to kindling. Evelyn stared at the file, its pages trembling in her grip, alive with the stories she'd ignored too long. "I don't want to bury it," she said, her voice steady now, a vow forged in the fire of this moment. "Then don't," Cole replied, rising with a nod, his boots thudding against the floor like a call to arms. He paused at the door, turning back, his voice low and piercing. "You asked Markeith if he believes things can change. I think he was waiting to see if you do." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Evelyn alone with the silence, a silence that roared with possibility. She closed the file, her hands steady now, and for the first time, she felt it. Belief. Fierce and unshakable. The system wouldn't change itself, but she could. And today, she would. The courtroom stood empty, a hollow shell bathed in the dim flicker of dying lights. Its silence a heavy shroud that pressed against Judge Evelyn Marston's shoulders. She sat at her bench, alone, the air thick with the musk of faded justice and the ghosts of voices now stilled. The case file lay before her, its pages splayed like the wings of a fallen bird, trembling under her touch as if alive with the secrets it held, arrest records. Disparities, lives reduced to ink and numbers, each one a scream she'd never heard until now. Her breath came shallow, a storm brewing in her chest as she stared into the abyss of her own past rulings. The weight of Markeith Jameson's truth a blade twisting in her gut. The gavel gleamed beside her, cold and accusing, a silent witness to the years she'd wielded it without question. She'd thought herself impartial, a guardian of the law, but now the shadows of those she'd sentenced, young, black, faceless in her haste, clawed at the edges of her vision. Their whispers a chorus of doubt. The room seemed to pulse, the walls leaning in, as if daring her to face the reckoning she'd postponed too long. Her fingers gripped the file, nails digging into its edges. And she vowed, this would not be buried. A sharp rap at the door jolted her, a crack of thunder in the stillness. Detective Raymond Cole stepped in, his silhouette of dark omen against the faint glow of the hall. His badge a glinting eye that saw too much. Thought I'd check in, he said, his voice a low rumble that rolled through the quiet like a distant quake. He crossed the room, his boots striking the floor with a steady, relentless beat, and stopped before her, his gaze piercing the haze of her thoughts. Evelyn met his eyes, her voice steady but laced with fire. I'm keeping this alive, Cole. This investigation, Markeith's work, it's not going to rot in some drawer. She tapped the file, the sound sharp as a gunshot, her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. Cole's lips twitched, a shadow of a smirk breaking his stoic mask. You're stirring a hornet's nest. Judge, you know that, right? He leaned against the bench, his shadow merging with hers. A conspirator in the chaos to come. Let it sting, she shot back, her eyes blazing, the flicker of fear drowned by a rising tide of purpose. I've sat here too long, blind to the cracks, no more. Her words were a vow, a spark igniting the dried tinder of her old life. She thought of Markeith, his steady gaze, his quiet dare, then maybe next time. Someone like me won't need a badge to be heard. That was the fuse, and she was the flame. Cole straightened, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're rewriting the rules, Evelyn. Some'll cheer, most'll fight you, hard. But this? He nodded at the file, its pages rustling like a restless spirit. This could break the wheel. Then let it break, she said, her voice a low, fierce growl, rising from a place she hadn't known existed. She stood, the bench creaking like a ship straining against a storm, and faced him fully. Justice isn't a machine, it's a choice. And I'm choosing now. He held her gaze, a spark of respect flashing in his eyes, then turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. Markeith asked if you believed things could change. He said, his words a parting shot that hung in the air like smoke. Looks like he got his answer. The door thudded shut, sealing her in with a silence no longer empty, but alive with the roar of possibility. Evelyn's hand rested on the file, its weighted torch in the dark. And for the first time, she saw it not as a burden, but a weapon. The system wouldn't shift on its own, she'd have to carve the path. And as the lights buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows across the room, she knew. This was where it began. A story ended, a war ignited, a call to arms for anyone willing to listen. The final words burned in her mind. A challenge to the world beyond these walls. If this shakes you, speak. Justice isn't blind, it's waiting for us to see. Thank you for accompanying us in today's story. See you again in the next videos. Hello and see you again.